Hello and welcome to our latest episode of the Question Series. Thanks for tuning in again, whether this be your first time or you've been with us since the beginning. If you haven't seen last week's or 2 weeks ago, the last episode, I encourage you to go back and watch that. This is kind of the beginning of our stand-up series where Duff Career and I talked from a historical perspective some of the different causes that Christians have attached themselves to and some of the things that we've learned from history about as far as the criteria with which we might think through some of the how our faith should attach itself to a cause and to make sure we don't interchange one for the other. And perhaps how to recognize that we may be on the wrong side eventually. Was quite an enjoyable conversation, and I hope you get the chance to check it out. As always, we welcome any ideas for what you would like to see us talk about, or if you're someone who feels like you have an area of expertise in either your career or your personal life that has really informed and challenged your faith that you would like to get up here and talk about, please contact us. And as always, feel free to send in questions while we're talking today, and we'll try our best to get to them. And if we don't, we'll follow up with you on the next episode. This week, or last week, as I said, we were talking about the theory of standing up and some of the different things we've learned. And something that we all know, those of us who've read the Bible for years now, know that throughout, right from the beginning to the end, one of the common themes is taking care of the widow and the orphan, as the Bible says. And the widow and the orphan is kind of the watchword in Scripture for people who've been oppressed. I suppose the word we would use now is the disadvantaged or the marginalized, I think has become the more popular word. And so in that theme, we have Jared Gossen with us today. And Jared Gossen is from the Wapiti House in the St. Lawrence Center here in Grand Prairie and has been for some time now, and has quite a bit of experience working with the local marginalized community, if you want to put it that way. Mm-hmm. And so Jared, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Since 2014, 2015, me and some friends have been endeavoring to provide daytime shelter services for people who are experiencing homelessness in Grand Prairie.
Right.
And how that came about is I was doing some work with HIV North Society, a longstanding nonprofit in the community, kind of working with street-level individuals. And also at the time on Saturdays, my wife and I were here at the Church of Christ, coordinating Saturday suppers. And the idea of the St. Lawrence Center, or the impetus of us getting involved, really hinged on my day-to-day work at HIV North being disrupted by, half a dozen, 10 people who would always come by our office, not to access services, but just to get out of the cold, or just because there was no other place except, maybe a bar to hang out, and they just needed a place to be. And at the time, Wapiti House, which at the time was called Rotary House, of course, had a overnight program, but basically if you were someone who was likely to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, you were kind of ushered out the door around 8 or 9 in the morning. Welcomed certainly at the Salvation Army Soup Kitchen during meal times, but they closed as well. So especially in the winter months, we saw you could be out in the cold for like 7-8 hours between meal times or bouncing around. That probably just isn't good enough for a city our size. And so we started to throw around some numbers and discuss with some friends of what it would really take to open up a daytime space. And we held some community engagement sessions. I always like to remember back then, and I think we had a really unrealistic financial goal of what it would take. And folks from ministry or from the church really understood this fly by the seat of your pants, follow your passion approach to things. And most of the naysayers, or where we got a lot of the questions from, were individuals who were, say, more ensconced in nonprofit or government. And certainly I would say we're still very Mickey Mouse and shoot from the hip, maybe getting more legit year over year. But back then it was really about friends trusting each other to come up with some solutions and kind of meet people where they were at. And so we had, done all the paperwork, done kind of the meat and potatoes of starting a charitable organization, and I was still working my day job at HIV North, and a friend came up and she said, I know you're thinking about this thing, and if you had the money, would you jump in and quit your job and do that? And I'm talking with a friend, I didn't really know a whole lot about her family background or whatever, and I said, oh yeah, knowing that even to fundraise half of what we needed to open the doors in the first place is probably a year and a half off. And this is, the fall of 2015.
Yeah.
And she said, okay, well, the next day she showed up and she gave us a car and she gave us $40,000. And I didn't know that her husband was loaded or, that the family was well off.
Yeah.
And she said, well, now you have to quit your job. And so we didn't have a location.
Yeah.
All we had was a little bit of money in the bank and a car to move some donations around. And in, I think, 3 weeks, we found a spot. So our first winter started Salvation Army.
Yeah.
And we basically, as myself and some volunteers, until we were able to get some more money together for another part-time staff member, to just keep the doors open of the Salvation Army open between meal times.
Right.
And something that we thought we were really, me and the volunteers, really at that time, it was people experiencing homelessness, getting their hands dirty and helping out and making this thing happen.
Yeah.
Really, what we thought we'd be able to handle anything that might come up.
Yeah.
I think we underestimated the need at the time. And the kind of drug using dynamics have changed since then too.
I was going to ask, at the beginning, I mean, you had your experience with HIV North, you had experience with the Saturday Supper, so you were aware and had relationships with the homeless community in Grand Prairie already to some extent. How did that change pretty radically when you had that 8, 9, 10 hour window when you were welcoming people and hanging out with people? Like, did your understanding of the community as individuals or as a community, did your impressions change? What did you learn at the beginning that you hadn't learned yet?
Yeah, we should come up with a name for the phenomenon, but there's something at the shelter that we reference is when you're working with someone, say at Wapiti House or the St. Lawrence Center, and you're their home base of operations, you get to see this whole other side, right? When I go to work, I present myself a certain way. When I'm at home, I'm relaxed and act a different way. And so it's not uncommon to see that behavior in folks who are just where they're supposed to feel the most comfortable and the most at home. And so I had worked in an office where people came to access maybe supplies they needed, some help with advocacy, just these 20-minute tops, half-hour chunks of people's lives.
Under control conversation.
Yeah, and then now here we are, the place where you can be comfortable for, I guess, that 8 to 10 hours. You see it all, right? You see the ups and downs. You saw the individuals' extreme behaviors and the vulnerability that comes with that home type environment. But we had about 30 people that first winter, on and off. Meant to do a review of the stats, but things got away from me. And 30 people in one overdose. And
okay, so when you say overdose, we want to talk sensitively about this kind of stuff, but I also want to ask questions so that our viewers who may not have talked about this before may want. So when you say one overdose, do you mean overdose death when you say that?
No, just overdose where someone needed medical intervention in order not to die from.
Because I realize I'm talking about faces and people and stories.
Totally.
But in this context, I want to make sure that we ask the questions.
And I think that's really important. And so, really caught off guard with a number of different things, and also the captain or the manager at the time of the Salvation Army here was Brian Beveridge, a really easy name to remember. They were around for, I think, a couple of years, and had come from Vancouver, a very harm reduction oriented type of environment for a couple of years there, so really understood what we were trying to do and the target demographic that we're especially trying to reach. Not individuals who could quietly read at the library or, go about their day-to-day and kind of pass for, a mainstream individual, but like folks who really, because of their mental health and addictions, struggled to maintain that shelter.
Just to be relatable with our viewers, the kind of person that makes you uncomfortable at Wendy's.
Yeah, for sure. Or 2 a.m. at 7-Eleven.
I understand that. So did you find when you started working more closely with this community as a home, as a place to be, as you said, to be more comfortable, did you find that you yourself were holding on to any stigmatisms with that community that you that were letting go, or you'd already worked long enough inside that community that was largely gone?
Yeah, my first position working with marginalized individuals in our community was at the old Wapiti Lodge. Thought it'd just be a summer gig or something to do through breakup.
Yeah.
And I quickly found that working in that residential type environment, it's an adventure, right?
Yeah.
Because you get to see that true side of people. So I'd been through a lot of things through the Wapiti Lodge, and the reason why I started working with HIV North was had an experience to go do just one night of real basic, hey, here's a chocolate bar, can I pray for you type of stuff at the downtown east side in Vancouver with a buddy who was going to school there. And when we came back to Grand Prairie, I'm like, well, I got to find the organization that's doing that.
Yeah.
So already, and because of some of my personal history, I didn't have much stigma towards drug users. I'd gotten my feet wet at the Wapiti Lodge, and when I started working at HIV North, there was a resident who came there, and the Wapiti Lodge had at the time, a very harsh zero tolerance policy for drug paraphernalia.
Right.
Well, HIV North is the needle exchange. Right. And here's a fellow who I've known for, a couple of months, and he comes to the needle exchange, I give him some cleans, and he's like, but then I found him on his bed or in his stuff over at the lodge. So he quickly had to go through a lot of these values clarification kind of stuff, serving the people that we do.
Yeah. So you're just kind of figuring out maybe not holding on to stigmatisms that have already been destroyed, but also, okay, so now that you don't have this wall in between you and the homeless community, but how do you actually act in such a way that's beneficial to both yourself and them, and integration in community, stuff like that, that's weakening your own expectations, I guess, for levels of behavior. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I definitely, the folks kind of attributed to the project and myself, we're always erring on the side of love, right? Yeah. And maybe on the side of flexibility and understanding. And so that first year at the Salvation Army, I think, was essential because there were some veterans there, right? Like Judy, who works at the soup kitchen, been there a long time, served multiple generations of homeless individuals and impoverished individuals. To see her approach, and also the Salvation Army knows their ministry is going to be there until the horns blast, right? Like the Salvation Army is going to be doing soup forever.
That's their mission statement.
It's very catchy. And so to see, definitely there's, volunteers there that were burnt out and maybe, having seen so much hurt over the years. Right. But really what we got to see is a ton of people who really get that there's, heartbreakingly no end to this. And so you figure out a pace, which maybe I'll learn one day, to be healthy. And just to be really encouraged by that structure as well. Yeah.
I had a conversation recently with somebody who was going through their own interpretations of the success of their own ministry, and we were talking through like what does successful mean. And so you've been doing this directly for 7 or 8 years now, 7 years, and it ended with me saying, and I don't know, I'm still chewing on this one, I don't know if it's correct or not, but it ended with me saying that as a Christian in certain avenues in our life, how we stand up for others, if we want to use our tagline from today, regardless of how that looks in our own ministry that we've attached ourselves to, that after we've done it for a while, maybe the realization isn't to be successful, but to remain to be faithful. Does that resonate with you at all after 7 years? Like, do you see? Because I know that the opioid epidemic has become a thing. You mentioned one overdose in your first year. I'm sure there's been more per year since then.
Yeah, we had about 30 or 40 this month.
Yeah, and I want to go further into that. But as it seems to get worse in some ways, and better in others, I'm sure. Do you find yourself emphasizing that I'm just going to show up in these days and not be burnt out? Like I'm going to show up in these days and say, these are the people that I'm loving today, and not see success, like see success in different terms?
Well, I definitely had a point where I did burn out, and I don't know if that's a point in time or a duration or just a state of being at certain points. And I have a really great colleague now, my director, Kathy. Her and I are sharing an office these last couple of COVID years. And we're not both burnt out on the same day. Right. And so prior to really getting into the harshness of the opioid epidemic, I think I relied a lot more on my partner as well, Jen, right? Because she was very active before we started our family, very active in what we were doing, and even we integrated the kids as much as we could. Just needing to show up. I think that's been a key piece, and knowing, like, not getting too excited about certain things and kind of managing my own expectations has been really important, because I've had my heart broken a few times, like, as we all have, with expectations and choices people might make or a direction a program might take. I jokingly say, okay, well, after today, it's only 37 more years. But I come by that honestly. My dad, Lord love him, he drove truck for 1,000 years and has been with one company another 1,000. Right. So the idea that consistency and commitment is okay. And has kind of been ingrained. And I really like being supported by a lot of colleagues in kind of that that viewpoint as well.
I think sometimes, especially as we open up enthusiasm, because we're talking to our viewers about standing up as a Christian. So often, especially when you're younger, like, you have this enthusiastic, I can make a difference here, and you do make a difference. But the expectation with which you think you might make a difference changes as you get older and as you engage in your ministry longer. And I think it's good to learn from somebody who's working with a community who they are individuals. They're making their own decisions. They're living their own lives, and you get to know them and help in ways you can, and aid in ways you can, and love in ways you can, and it turns into a relationship. And in relationship, it's messy. And so as we engage in our relational ministries that way, often we can either be burnt out or cynical, or we can renew not the enthusiasm, but renew the consistency. So I like that you use that word, was the consistency of, and I like to use the word faithfulness with it. They just faithfully show up the next day, kind of thing. So I just wanted to ask about that because I think oftentimes, especially after you've been doing it for, say, 10 years, 20 years, we or even 6 months, if it's something that's when you're really young, you go, this isn't working the way I wanted, and maybe God's not calling me to this, and we like to use those words, God's calling me, and all that stuff. So I think that the call to faithfulness, and with this subject, I mean, we absolutely know that God calls us to work with the marginalized. I mean, that's just straight out of 2,000-year-old scripture. So, along those lines, what has this experience taught you about your faith? Like, when you read scripture, when you interact with Christians, when you talk to Jesus and about him, how has this experience informed how God sees humanity, how you see humanity, how you see the world, how you think God sees the world? How has that informed your own faith? Has it deepened it? Has it challenged it? Has it eroded it?
Yeah.
Whatever your...
I think there's well, if I had to pick a word, it's been simplified.
Yeah.
A lot of the vicarious trauma and direct trauma that I experienced, and some very close colleagues of mine as well. For our first couple of years, it was myself and 2 other people.
Right.
And the center and the work of the center took its toll. Has taken its toll on my friends too, that have come alongside me to help. Yeah. I had to eventually, and it still changes year over year, eventually come to just having to believe that the creator of all of this is good, because on a day-to-day basis, I don't see any evidence of goodness. And so
police officers often say the same thing.
Yeah.
They have a similar, they see the worst of humanity. I mean, I wouldn't say you see the worst of humanity, but you do see the intensity of the struggle.
The struggle and how awful people can be to each other.
Yeah.
And then also the organizational injustice and the systems of oppression that exist.
Right.
To create a class of people that have, for the most part, been forgotten or cast aside. And so,
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to keep going.
You have something.
Oh, I mean, I kind of wanted. I mean, certainly, if you would like to keep talking about that, but you say organizational justice and systems that create oppression and stuff. So So in the news and in our last 2 years, we've often seen, flag wavers and sign wavers and Facebook posters, and it's all about standing up for a cause, and we've seen a lot of that, and especially against institutions and against organizations. So I kind of want to get your impressions of. So here you are living with people, and that's also helped create, I imagine, an advocacy, at least locally, for those people. Like, I imagine, have you had an opportunity to talk to council at different times or talk to influential people in town at different times about changing some of the organization? Because that fits right in with how do we stand up for people, not just with people, right? Yeah.
I think from time to time, with different levels of government, there's an interest in some level of collaboration or a discussion about how to do things better. And there's incremental change, which is exciting to see from time to time. The opportunity for someone like myself to be influential in that, I think, is quite diminished by like a lot of bureaucratic agenda and that sort of thing. But there's a lots of opportunity because everyone wants to talk about it. You want to spend $15 million buying a hotel. You want to talk a lot about homelessness and the need for that. So there's a lot of opportunity to.
Well, you're talking specifically about the North Side project. That's
just as an example. And from time to time, there's different levels of government that we'll have ministers visit, and you can give a little bit of feedback. But it's good for them to go back to Edmonton and not change anything or forget about the North again. I've really appreciated that, and I think also consistency has helped me in those areas as well. I've always been a little nuts and at least a little shoot from the hip, and so people know that they'll get that honesty and that I'm not going to fake it overly. And if you can tell I'm faking it, there's something up. And then right from our get-go, so we're not a faith-based organization, and actually our charitable status, our organizational structure has changed because we've become part of the same organization that Wapiti House is. We're all one big happy family, and that's kind of just choices around stability and collaboration.
And COVID changed a bunch of things.
And COVID as well, and the outpouring of support that we did get from the provincial government to make sure that people were taken care of through the pandemic.
I think it's important for people to hear that the government does do things like that from time to time.
Yes, absolutely, right? And no, it wasn't, that was one case. So we have about 70 people, 70 to 100 that might come through the center on a really busy day. The location that we've been using, which is the Street Outreach Center, was purchased with a donation from the Rotary Clubs and the City of Grand Prairie. Made this permanent home for us. Lots of backstory about why we needed a permanent home. But all of a sudden, COVID hits, and we've got 100 people in a space designed for 29. And so very quickly, the municipality and the province pivoted to make sure that we had some funding to open up actually our old space and have those two programs running for the better part of 2 years. Challenging, but really, really good, and would like that to continue, but here we are.
Well, how do you, like, I'm along that organizational thing, so say people want to get involved in Grand Prairie in this type of thing. So say you are familiar with the bureaucracy. Say someone is embedded in that, a local city councillor or an employee for the city or an influential person who they listen to. What would you say would be one of the better things that they can engage in along those lines? If they're like, my gifts, I can't walk into a place like this. Nobody understands me, and I don't understand them. It just doesn't work. My gifts are shaking hands. What can those types of people do to help with the marginalized community?
On the part of like local councillors and other leaders, the folks that have come at least to like drop off some cookies or some mitts or something, and maybe say hey, because we've had a few free lunches together or something like that. It's always really appreciated, and then they get that hand first. You really have to breathe it in, in the center, breathe in what it means to have 50 people in a room that was designed for 29, and in the middle of winter, and the boots are off, and the the drug using behaviors are running rampant.
Yeah.
So once you come and experience that, I think that just gives you that firsthand experience of go to and explain it.
Right.
We had some folks who were doing a needs assessment for the city, and they witnessed some like crazy stuff that's part of our day to day, and it still sticks with them the most because they absolutely have seen that on paper and are some of the best advocates in closed doors, behind closed doors. But now they saw what it means to respond to an overdose outside in the snow at -20, and that sticks with them. So come get that real world frame of reference, and people are, either you're passionate about poverty or, you're, I don't know, selling something else. But once you get that frame of reference, you can go tell your friends, and that's how change is really being made.
It's true. Change happens in a crowd usually. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. What would you say? This is kind of a change in direction here a little bit, but I'm just kind of thinking through my own thought processes as I've been made more aware of these types of things. And again, not through firsthand experience. I'm one of those people who hasn't walked in and seen these things, only heard vicarious stories.
Well, for 2 years we didn't want you to walk in.
No, that's good.
Don't walk anywhere.
Stay home. That's for sure. But we do hear about so revisiting the opioid thing and how overdoses have increased, and we do see that as a narrative in the news now, and so that it also adopts its own political discourse, and that political discourse weaves its way through the church and about the whole legalization of drugs or the harm reduction centers versus the no use enforcement type approach, all that kind of stuff. What would you say to a Christian who genuinely cares about the marginalized community and some of the things they get exposed to and some of the things that maybe aids them remaining in that state? What would you say to a Christian who's grown up very embedded in our culture's aversion to that kind of experience and being like, well, that's somehow morally bad? What would you say to them to say, like, I know you genuinely love these people. How do you get over that hump? Like, how do you get into that harm reduction space? How do you get into that the most benefit without the moral clouding of the things that we grew up with?
Well, first and foremost, I think the biggest thing is it would be very naive to think that there's been adequate investment in strategies other than harm reduction in the first place.
Right.
So intervention, accessible intervention for people living on the street, actually getting to detox, accessing treatment and funding for that.
Okay.
It would be hard enough for you and I with relatively, say, normal lives or mainstream lives to access those services.
Let alone somebody's...
Let alone someone who's no idea of how that's all supposed to work and doesn't have anywhere to go once they go through treatment anyway.
Right.
So there is that component. I think harm reduction used to be controversial prior to the opioid epidemic, because back then we were still talking about people who had time and a chance to change before they would die.
Right.
When it was all about meth, non-beverage alcohol like Listerine and crack in Grand Prairie, we had time. We had 3 or 4 years for someone to come to Saturday supper and make sure they get all the resources and that sort of thing. The opioid epidemic changed that and flipped it on its head, and
reduced the intervention time.
It really did. Now harm reduction is essentially focused on making sure that we can keep people alive long enough that they might access treatment. If you want to get down to it, long enough that they might turn things around and experience the love of Christ. So really, without a focus on accepting the fact that people engage in risky behaviors, or accepting that we're kind of at that point, it's a moot subject to kind of talk about the morality of that behavior that a person's engaged in if it's likely to kill them today. Right. Someone's light fraud that just stealing office supplies or lying to their spouse. If they're coming to church Sunday morning, you kind of got years to work on that adverse behavior, that sin behavior, if we have to use the big S word. Drug use, for one, it wasn't a moral failing. Like, we know enough that it's all based around trauma, and there's trauma that brought you to the street, and then there's trauma that you experience every day on the street,
Yeah.
so that compounds the issue.
Some of us have lived the kind of lives where you have seen it that way before, though. So I just want to kind of address a bunch of maybe assumptions that our viewers might be have. We're all on a different continuum of our learning, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
If you want to hit me again with the question, if I
just
went off crazy.
No, you went in exactly the right direction, I think, because I mean, this is something that you're aware of. So immediately, I learned as soon as you start talking about the funding for intervention and what harm reduction, how that fits into that intervention, where how that needs to happen, and so I'm learning a ton that way. I guess it's just more like what do you say to a Christian who's still maybe at the beginning, who just maybe like these people are bad. And I genuinely care about them, but how do I care? You know what I mean? Like,
oh wow.
Yeah.
I've been asked this question before.
Yeah.
And I guess Sunday school worked or something on me.
Yeah.
So I've never had to ask. Like I've never had a good answer.
Yeah.
Like man, the Good Samaritan. Jesus.
Yeah.
The people loving people just because they should.
You know what I think? I don't think we should treat that as a pat answer. Like when you say Jesus, the Good Samaritan, people loving people the way they should. I mean that's where I think maybe the point of this question series comes in. Is we've been trying to help people think critically through their faith, ask themselves questions that they haven't asked before, that we may not have the answers to in 35 minutes, but at least give them topics to go, I haven't thought about that. So to project those Sunday school stories into their current situation, which we don't necessarily do if we've been hearing them since we were 3. And some people, like yourself, it gets ingrained in you, and other people, we live the privileged kind of lives where it is privileged that we've lived the kind of lives we have, but we haven't been exposed enough to other ways of living that we see things. We can't project that story in the gospel to our own lives and what we can do, that kind of thing. So I think it might be fair to say that to those people, it just learn about Jesus, talk to Jesus, see how he sees people. It would be a great place to start.
Well, and I think one of the big challenges that I'll see a lot is if you think of drug addiction or being able to still be Jesus to someone who's in active drug use. Yeah. If you're thinking about a friend or a family member, family, you're probably too close to that. Yeah. Right. And
we had someone on a while back that talked about how family is. People have a hard time explaining to their family.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to out my family members, but we've all been through some stuff. I have surprisingly little patience to help my kids through stuff that we deal with every day at Drop-In. Yeah. And so Drop-In makes me a better dad because I get to use some of those skills, but still there's something about what happens in my house. There's a lot of love, but still too close when the rubber hits the road sometimes to really think objectively around certain behaviors. And so if you're trying to apply the idea of harm reduction and how that, or maybe even just a more flexible meeting somebody where they're at to the abusive spouse or the really chaotic relationship that you've had with your teenager, man, that's crazy making. And that's probably not the place to start to necessarily build empathy, which is super, super weird. Yeah.
So don't take it on yourself.
Yeah.
Your teenager's doing this, your cousin's doing this. Don't take it on yourself.
Yeah.
Like involve a community of experts.
And certainly you're going to need all the support to kind of rally in that particular situation. But the place where you're going to maybe have the breakthrough and some practical strategic steps is to maybe get involved in a different way. Right. That isn't as close. Yeah. A really cool thing that I saw our first year was there was this fella, I don't know if he's alive or dead anyway, but haven't seen him for 4 years. Really, hardcore alcoholic, even that word is kind of problematic. Yep. But my dad, he's been sober for something like 35, 36 years. Yeah. And always talked a really big game against alcohol, and certainly gave us that viewpoint growing up. Yeah. But to see the empathy and the compassion he had for this fellow that was living on the street who was drinking every day because he understood his struggle, totally different. And so it's just very cool. I think we can all put that experience to good use.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's the empathy factor is a big one. The empathy factor is a big one. Just as we're kind of coming to a little bit later in the discussion, I kind of wanted to also ask directly, we've kind of wandered around the subject a little bit, but ask directly, so as somebody who's been doing this for 7 years and longer in other forms, what have you seen the church done poorly? What have you seen them done well? And how do you think we can move forward as, let's call it an organization? How can we move forward as an organized faith community here in town specifically? So what have we done well? What can be we commended for and keep improving on? What have we done poorly that we could be challenged on? And what are some suggestions that we can do in an organized fashion moving forward?
Pre-pandemic, we had 2 regular volunteers from different church communities that came, retired individuals, and they brought with them kind of a network of more casual volunteers that would come help out. Pardon me, clean a microwave, serve soup, whatever it might be. There's that good practical stuff that I think really it was the meat and potatoes of churchness for 1,000 years. Offering plate here, but also serving soup here, right? That's kind of been the thing that's been going on. I think just getting back to those basics, really, like the coordination, I think, would be a big part. I know a lot of the nuanced ministries that are available in the community and the stuff that they're doing and the different target demographics that they're trying to hit. The community should know about that. Like if we could get together and share that a little bit better, because
so communication between church groups,
and
parachurch groups,
and it shows that there's opportunities for everybody, right? Because there's 5 or 6 people who are appropriate to come and hang out at the St. Lawrence Center or help at Wapiti House, right? And then there's a ton more who need to be involved with at-risk youth and maybe individuals who are living just under the poverty line, that sort of thing. So that coordination to show the opportunities. The other is really there's tons of advocacy that should be happening. And there's other social issues other than abortion and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to talk about. And one of them could be eradicating poverty in our generation. Like
So when you're talking poorly, do you think that the church shouldn't just be narrowed on a few controversial issues, that they should look for very practical ways in which they can serve in the moment?
I think so. It's not just with individuals experiencing homelessness, but Saturday Supper is a great example, right? About 2/3 of the individuals there experiencing homelessness, going to shelters, living in the bush at night, but the other third that kind of cycled through a little bit more quickly are people like really almost at the shelter or almost in the bush. And I think that's something that the church is doing really well generally, is hopefully creating environments where needy people feel really welcome and know that there's someone that's going to talk to them if they come to a Sunday service, or if they come to a church program, or if they bring their kids to that church program. So being so focused on the target demo that I am and kind of my crew, I sometimes can forget that, there's this, if there's 500 people that we're serving in the shelter system and living on the streets and that sort of thing and couch surfing, man, there's thousands within, the county and the city that really need everything that the church might be able to throw at them to keep them from falling down.
Okay. So I guess kind of look for those people, so if I can sum up a little bit, communicate, coordinate, and find out what's going on, kind of thing, like with yourselves and other programs, as well as I guess continuing to keep it simple with the service aspect. And then the last thing you said, I don't know how to rephrase that, but So I think the viewers probably understood.
We're looking at the last 2 years, of course, the craziness that we've all experienced, right? So we don't have to so much get into that. But churches are well positioned. We're definitely ingrained to be a natural support system for people who need it. And it would be great if everyone who is currently housed stays that way because they have an organic network of support, and that is the church.
Right.
But not all churches, of course, and we won't name names.
Yeah. No, of course not. Of course not, because the whole point is in this venue anyway, is to encourage people to go that way, to bring a very small amount of awareness in the form of a conversation, so that they can increase that awareness in the form of participation, so that then they can implement some of the things that you've been talking about. So I think you're right. I mean, this isn't the forum to do that, but that, I mean, we all know where we fit on that. We all know if we are doing that or not. And we all know if our church is doing that or not, and how we can encourage that our church to move forward. Is there anything else? We've kind of come to a close as far as the time goes. Is there anything else that you would like to say about what you do? Perhaps give somebody a direct opportunity to say, look, okay, tomorrow I want to knock on a door, or tomorrow I want to do something. Tomorrow, what could we do to support your ministry, if we want to call it that, your social function here in town? What could we do tomorrow if we're like, the person watching is sitting on the edge of their couch going, this is me, this is exactly what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
So there's the person at the beginning who hasn't struggled through the moral aspect of it yet, and then there's a person at the end who's like, I've been looking for this is me, I'm watching this right now, and I need to talk to this guy. What can they do?
Yeah. Well, I think looking at the next year, the St. Lawrence Centre has bounced back and forth with like service levels and different things. Through COVID, we got a ton of money from the provincial government, because you had to keep those doors open, because how are people supposed to stay safe and isolate if they're living on the street?
Yeah.
But now that we're kind of returning to regular funding levels, actually, we're looking at kind of the worst year fundraising wise than we've ever had, because in 2015, when we were cool and fun and new, everyone actually still had a couple of bucks, and you know, a bag of oranges wasn't costing you $15.
Yes.
So we need money desperately. But the folks with most of the money are down in Edmonton, and so make sure and help us out with some advocacy and talk to our local leaders about that our community makes a ton of revenue for our province, and we deserve some investment back.
So you need donations, obviously, but you also need effective donations. So you need somebody in the face of somebody with access to grants and access to funding. All of it,
and you know, we live on the back of the $50 a month donations that are made through the website as well. The other component is I think we can, now that we're looking at, you know, restrictions are relaxed a little bit, we can accommodate a couple of heroes. And so there are people who are ready to get into the nitty gritty of all of this. Come and talk to me. You know, if you Google St. Lawrence Centre, don't follow the link. There's this whole thing with our thing on Google. It'll direct you to discount pharmaceuticals. We don't endorse those pharmaceuticals, and Google doesn't want to help. But you'll find us. We'll give you the right link. But we can accommodate some heroes. We can definitely integrate how your family might want to get involved and do some baking or get socks and hygiene items, that sort of thing. There's opportunity for everybody to kind of get involved, that side of things, and really that's the only way that the St. Lawrence Centre functioned before. We're kind of coming out of this phase of experiencing what it could be to have sustainable funding and not worry about that sort of thing. But here's the opportunity again, as we all look at reconnecting and getting back to something that matters. There's real opportunity for, you know, people to get involved. So reach out, and we're pretty accessible. Excellent.
Well, thank you very much, Jared, for joining in. I really appreciated this discussion with you. This was a learning experience for me. And I hope that anybody who watches this either right now or in the next couple of weeks or the next few months, whenever they see it, that they go, well, this might be something that I at least want to get more awareness of and help out as a member of Grand Prairie, at the very least, as a member of a church in Grand Prairie. For our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sticking with us for a little bit of time now. And as Jared said, you know, give him a ring. If you're the person who's sitting on the edge of your seat going, this is me, this is what I've wanted to be a part of, give him a shout. In 2 weeks, we're going to have another conversation in our question series. Please keep an eye on our Facebook page, Grand Prairie Church Christ on Facebook, just to see what the topic will be and who we're talking to. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.